Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the ashen remains of Elden Ring's most haunting, most devoted, and most fascinating spirit companions. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next. And subscribe if this helps you sleep. The city beneath the city, hidden beneath the already hidden world of Nokron, Eternal City, lies a place called Night's Sacred Ground, a sunken courtyard of pale stone draped in golden accents, where the Nox people once attempted something that quietly defines half the game's most powerful summons. The mimic tier spirit Ash, one of the most iconic companions in all of Elden Ring, is found here in a chest behind a locked door. But what makes this location extraordinary is what it represents lore-wise. The Nox, having been cast underground by the Greater Will for transgressing against the established cosmic order, spent centuries pursuing a single obsessive goal, forging their own lord, not borrowing one from the Erd Tree, not pledging fealty to a demigod, making one from scratch. The Mimic Tier is what emerged from that obsession, a liquid metal creature of mimicry, a silver tier variant engineered specifically to become a perfect vessel of lordship. The fact that you find it locked away in the most sacred part of that buried city speaks to how precious and how ultimately failed this experiment was. A twin that costs blood. Almost every spirit Ash in the game drains your FP, the blue resource tied to magical ability and endurance. The Mimic Tear is the only one that costs HP instead. When you summon it, you spend 660 points of your own health to call it forth. This is not an oversight or a gameplay quirk. It is a deliberate design choice that reflects the creature's nature. Mimic Tears are born of tears, the same material as the flask of crimson tears that heals you. They are liquid life-given form. So in a very real sense, the game is asking you to bleed a little of yourself into existence to conjure your double. There is something deeply poetic about that. The cost is your vitality. What you get back is a reflection. The cheese that became legend. Because the Mimic Tear copies your exact equipped loadout at the moment of summoning, players discovered a delightful trick early in Elden Ring's life that spread across the internet like wildfire. If you unequip every single piece of gear, every weapon, every talisman, every spell, before entering a fog gate and then summon the Mimic, the boss copies a completely naked and weaponless version of you. It spawns confused, bare-handed, and briefly useless. By the time it figures out what to do, you can re-equip everything and engage the boss while your double flounders. It is one of the funniest exploits From Software has ever accidentally included, and it works just as well as cheese against the Mimic Tier boss fight itself, where it mirrors your equipment before the battle begins. Walk in naked, re-equip immediately, and you fight a confused copy with no weapons. She carried a god. Somewhere in the depths of Elphael, Brace of the Halig Tree, one of the most brutal late-game areas in the entire game, there is a chest. It is not easy to reach. You have to navigate past scarlet rot pools, past clean rot knights who have partially merged with fungal growth, and past the quiet horrors of a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary, but became something else entirely. Inside that chest are the ashes of Clean Rot Knight Finley. Her item description is 14 words long, but those 14 words carry the weight of an entire saga. Finley was one of the few survivors of the Battle of Aeonia, the catastrophic clash between Malenia and Redan. When that battle ended, when the Scarlet Bloom erupted and turned Caelid into a wasteland and left both demigods incapacitated, Finley made a decision. She picked up her sleeping goddess and carried her home, alone through all of it, through Kalid, through the Altus Plateau, through the Forbidden Lands, through the snowfields, all the way back to the Halig Tree, fighting off anything that crossed her path. One night, one unconscious demigod, an impossible journey, and when it was done, Finley died. There is a small grave for her in the Halig Tree that almost no one ever finds. The mother who became a spirit. Roderica is the quiet, earnest woman you first meet, huddled by the fire at Stormill Shack, wrapped in a crimson hood, voice barely above a murmur. She speaks to you about chrysalids, about feeling the sorrow of the people who died in Stormvale. She has a sense for spirits in a way that goes far beyond intuition. When you bring her to the round table hold and nudge the right conversations between her and Hugh, she unlocks her true calling and becomes the only person in the lands between capable of spirit tuning. What she does when she upgrades your ashes is not mere maintenance. She is communing with the dead, reaching into whatever exists beyond death in this world, and coaxing those remnant souls into greater strength. The item she gives you very early on, the spirit jellyfish ashes, carries a small name, Aurelia. That is not just a generic jellyfish. That was someone Roderica cared about. She's entrusting you with the spirit of a companion and asking, gently, that you look after her. The assassin's daughter, Black Knife. Tish is, by most accounts, one of the single strongest spirit ashes in the entire base game. Her ability to dodge boss attacks with supernatural agility, her blade of death, which chips percentage-based health rather than flat damage, and her low profile make her a devastating choice even against the final bosses of the game. But the story of who she was makes the summon hit entirely differently. Tish was a Black Knife assassin, one of the elite killers who carried out the Night of the Black Knives, the event that preceded the shattering and sent the entire world into chaos. Her mother was Electo, the ringleader of the Black Knife Order. On that night, Tish and her fellow assassins imbued their blades with a stolen fragment of the Rune of Death and used them to slay Godwyn the Golden, the first demigod to ever die. After the assassination, the knights fled the capital. During that flight, Tish was killed protecting her mother. She was a child fighting alongside killers, loyal to the last. You earn her ashes by defeating Electo herself, a mother's spirit, fought and overcome, so her daughter can fight alongside you. The Headless Oathkeeper. Lutel the Headless is available incredibly early in the game. Her ashes drop from the cemetery shade in Tombswood Catacombs, a dungeon tucked into the Weeping Peninsula in the southern tip of Limgrave. She costs 104 FP to summon, carries a lance dripping with death, and specializes in hurling spectral projectiles before teleporting erratically around the arena in a way that makes her almost impossible for most bosses to lock onto. She is infuriatingly hard to kill, but what is she exactly? Her description tells you that Lutel was a mausoleum knight, one of the Order sworn to guard the wandering mausoleums, those enormous turtle-shaped stone monuments that plod endlessly through the Weeping Peninsula and the mountaintops of the Giants. These mausoleums house soulless demigods awaiting eventual revival. Lutel sacrificed her life so that in death she could continue that vigil, earning the honor of Erdtree burial. She is protecting something long after death. She has no head, and she still has not stopped. The Gravity Archer who learned. From a demigod. Radan is one of the most celebrated warriors in Elden Ring's history. A demigod who held back the stars through sheer force of will and gravitational sorcery. a general so beloved by his soldiers that they kept fighting for him even after he had lost his mind to scarlet rot. Among those soldiers, one stood apart. Olga was the longest-serving member of the Redmane Knights, and during his years of service, he did something remarkable. He studied gravity manipulation directly alongside Radun himself. Most of Radun's knights carry swords and shields. Olga carries a great bow and learned to imbue his arrows with the same gravitational forces that Radun used to restrain the stars. His spirit ash is found in the War-Dead Catacombs, a dungeon accessible only after Radun's defeat, where the spirits of soldiers who died in the Battle of Aeonia still fight each other in eternal, pointless war. Olga's best trick is hidden. If you use any warcry or roar-type weapon art near him, he responds with a roar of his own and unleashes a special rain of gravitational arrows, an ability he shares with his old general. You have to know to ask for it. Born to be someone else's puppet, Seluvis is, by most players' estimation, one of the more unpleasant characters in a game full of unpleasant characters. He operates out of a tower north of Rani's Rise and speaks to you with thinly veiled contempt. His questline is built around a dark purpose. He wants to reduce people to puppets. Literally. He gives you a potion and asks you to administer it to Nephili Lu. You have options. Give it to Nephili as instructed. Give it to Gideon Ofnir, who simply disposes of it and foils Seluvis's plan entirely. Or, through a separate questline, administer it to Dung Eater, the monstrous wretch who defiles corpses and spreads a curse across the lands between. If you choose the Dung Eater route, something extraordinary happens. He is reduced to a puppet. His will stripped, his monstrous power harnessed. You receive the Dung Eater puppet ashes, and suddenly, one of the most feared and hateful presences in the game is following your orders and fighting your enemies. The power dynamic is deliciously inverted. You cannot get both Nephili's and Dung Eater's puppets in a single playthrough, because there is only one potion to give. The choice is permanent. The bells she never rang. The spirit calling bell is the item that makes spirit ash summoning possible. Without it, the ashes are just dust in your inventory. After you accept Melina's offer and gain the ability to summon Torrent, you return to the Church of Elair at night and encounter a blue-robed witch named Renna, later revealed to be an alias of Rani the Witch herself, perched on a ruined wall. She asks whether you can call the spectral steed, and if you confirm you can, she hands you the spirit calling bell along with the lone wolf ashes, explaining that the bell was entrusted to her by Torrent's former master. The whole exchange has a layered quality once you know who Renna actually is. But the bell has a deeper history too. The act of using a bell to summon spirits is ancient in the lands between, connected to an older tradition than the Erd Tree. The act of ringing it, of calling the dead back into service, belongs to a lineage of practice stretching back to a time before the Golden Order, before the Elden Ring itself was shattered. Every time you ring that bell, you are participating in a ritual that predates the world as it currently exists. The hawk who served the old king. There are two things you need to do to get Stormhawk Dean. First, you need to find the 4 belfries in Lurnia, a set of 4 ancient towers, each housing a sending gate. Second, you need to spend one of the rare imbued sword keys on the gate, labelled Precipice of Anticipation. That gate takes you back to the Chapel of Anticipation, the very location where your Tarnished woke up at the very beginning of the game. You are returning to where everything started. In the upper level of that chapel, past the door that was locked on your first visit, lies a chest containing Dean's ashes. Dean was a stormhawk, a great bird of prey, who served the old king of Stormvale long ago, during a time the description calls when the true storm raged. The current ruler of Stormvale is Godric the Grafted, a diminished and desperate man who grafts foreign limbs onto his body to compensate for his weakness. The king Dean served was not like that. The old storm was something else entirely. The ashes that cost your sanity. There are 6 legendary spirit ashes in the base game, each designated with the title Legendary Ashen Remains in their description, and each contributing to the Legendary Ashen Remains achievement. Collecting all 6 earns you a trophy, the kind of accomplishment that requires you to reach some of the most remote and guarded corners of the lands between. But there is something interesting about the framing. Most achievement lists in games reward completionism cleanly. Here, the game is quietly acknowledging that these 6 spirits were once the most significant souls in their respective corners of the world. Teach was an assassin who changed history. Finlay was the knight who kept a sleeping god alive. Urga was a general's most trusted student. Lutal was a guardian who refused to stop guarding even after death. Kristoff was a warrior who captured a grafted abomination. And Mimic Tear was an attempt to create life worthy of lordship. 6 legendary deaths, 6 legendary stories, sealed into ash. The ancestral deer of the underground. The ancestor spirit is not obtained the way most ashes are. It does not drop from a dungeon boss or emerge from a merchant's stock. It requires solving a puzzle first. You ignite 8 flame pillars scattered across Siofra River, the underground region beneath Limgrave, each one lighting a corresponding torch on the staircase of the Hallowhorn grounds. When all 8 burn, the enormous deer carcass at the top of that staircase begins to glow. Interact with it, and you are transported to the boss arena to fight the ancestor spirit itself. A spectral stag made of antlers and ghostly light, sweeping and charging across the arena. Defeat it, and you earn the ancestral follower ashes. Not the deer's own spirit, but those of one of the horned people who once attended it in life. The creature itself is one of the more visually stunning fights in the game, and what it represents in lore runs deep. The ancestor spirit belongs to a tradition predating the Erdtree's dominion, a primordial natural force tied to the old way of things. There is a second and stronger variant, the regal ancestor spirit, which requires the same ritual with 6 pillars in Nokron, Eternal City. Both ask you to light the fire before the old god will answer. You can only summon near the monuments. This is one of those things the game hints at, but never fully explains. You cannot summon a spirit ash anywhere. You have to be within the radius of a rebirth monument, a small stone marker that appears near boss arenas and certain hostile areas throughout the lands between. When you are close enough to one, a tiny icon of the monument appears on the left side of your screen. No icon, no summon. Many players spend a long time thinking their summons are broken before they realize the monument system exists. The name is evocative, Rebirth Monument. These stones mark places where death is particularly active, where the barrier between living and spirit is thin enough that your bell can be heard across it. You are not just summoning a friend, you are calling across a veil. The jellyfish, with a name. When you first talk to Roderica at Stormhill Shack and exhaust her dialogue, she gives you the spirit jellyfish ashes. Most players equip them immediately, find them useful early on, and eventually replace them with something more powerful. But the ashes have a name embedded in lore, Aurelia. This is not just a generic jellyfish. Roderica has specifically asked you to look after this spirit. The jellyfish's in-game attacks are slow, and its use of poison makes it better as a debuffer than a tank. But the care embedded in its presentation is a detail most people never noticed. Later, if you bring Roderica a chrysalid's memento, an item found on a pile of corpses in Stormvale Castle, she tells you she felt those people go, that she could sense their spirits merging into the castle. Her gift of Aurelia is not random. It is her entrusting someone else with someone she cared about, in a moment when she felt completely alone. Whether Aurelia was a companion who travelled with Roderica before the game began, or simply a spirit she bonded with along the way, the care she brings to that gifting suggests the relationship was genuinely meaningful to her. That is the kind of storytelling Elden Ring hides in item descriptions and offhand lines of dialogue. The skeleton that refuses to die. Skeletal militiaman Ashes summon 2 spear-wielding skeletons that fight with middling damage and moderate speed. At first glance, they seem outclassed by almost every named spirit in the game, but they carry a trait that makes them quietly extraordinary in large mob situations. They can resurrect, just like the skeleton enemies you fight throughout the Lands Between. The skeletal militiaman will collapse when reduced to 0 health, and if no enemy strikes their remains within a second or two, they will pull themselves back upright with a sliver of health and resume fighting. Enemy AI rarely knows to hit fallen skeletons. In a chaotic crowd of enemies, your 2 militiamen can die and come back multiple times per fight, forcing enemies to manage more targets than they expect. For the FP cost and the early availability, you get them by defeating the Tibia Mariner field boss at Summonwater Village. They punch far above their apparent weight. The knight who captured Godfroy. Kristoff's spirit Ash describes him as an honourable knight of Lendil, who was also a devout worshipper of the ancient dragons. That combination, a knight of the Erdtree's capital city, who simultaneously worships the ancient dragons, says a great deal about the history of the Lands Between. The ancient dragons predate the Golden Order. Worshipping them in Lendil would have been a complicated thing, a devotion to something older and in some ways more primal than the Erdtree's power. Yet Kristoff served both, apparently without contradiction. The specific feat for which he earned Erdtree burial, the burial honour given to great heroes, was capturing Godfroy the Grafted. Godfroy is the boss you find locked in the Golden Lineage Evergale in Altus Plateau. He was a kinsman of Godric, another member of the Golden Lineage, who also practiced the grotesque art of grafting foreign limbs onto his body, and whose attempt to seize control of Lendil was so violent and so embarrassing for the lineage that he had to be imprisoned. Kristoff captured this dangerous frenzied monster and was buried with full honours for it. You get his ashes by defeating an ancient hero of Zamor. The irony of earning a lightning-wielding knight spirit from an ice boss is one of From Software's quiet little jokes. The Albinoric who chose this. Most spirits in Elden Ring are the dead. People who fell in battle, who sacrificed themselves, who were reduced to ash by the violence of the shattering. Latenna the Albinoric is different. Her item description contains a phrase that stops you cold. A rare case of one who chose to become a spirit voluntarily. Latenna was a living person when you met her, sitting beside the body of her dead wolf Lobo at the Slumbering Wolf's shack. When she asks you to take her toward the Hallitree and you agree, she willingly transforms herself into Spirit Ash so she can travel with you. She is not dead. She chooses this form because it is the only way she can complete her mission. And at the end of her questline, when you carry her to the apostate derelict in the consecrated snowfields, and she delivers her birthing droplet to her sleeping giant sister, fulfilling the purpose she has carried across the entire breadth of the lands between. She thanks you. She chose to be Ash, and she chose well. The puppet that stays. When you administer Saluvis's potion to someone, what you get back is something called a puppet. This is distinct from a spirit Ash in the traditional sense. Puppets are people whose wills have been overwritten by Saluvis's craft, their consciousness suppressed so that their bodies obey. The Finger Maiden, Theralina puppet, the Jar-White puppet, the Dolores the Sleeping Arrow puppet. Saluvis sells all of these at his tower if you purchase them before his questline ends. They are people he has already done this to. The fact that they come in neatly packaged ash form, available for purchase alongside common goods, says something bleak and specific about Saluvis's view of the people around him. Each one was a living person before he got hold of them. The puppets fight well. They are completely stripped of anything that made them who they were. The hawk that buffs its allies. Most spirit ashes fight on their own terms, dealing whatever damage they deal and tanking whatever hits they absorb. Stormhawk Dean does something unusual. The hawk's cries actively embolden its allies in combat. Mechanically, this manifests as a poise damage buff that increases the stagger potential of your attacks. Hit enemies while Dean is calling from nearby, and those attacks connect with more force, breaking stances faster, sending large enemies stumbling. This is a passive benefit that many players never notice because they are too busy watching the hawk slash enemies with its wind-wrapped talons. Dane is particularly devastating in the early game and remains useful well into late content. It served the old king of Stormvale until the very end, and that loyalty to the people fighting beside it translates directly into how it functions in battle. Latenna cannot move. This is the great limitation of Latenna the Albinoric as a spirit Ash, and it stems entirely from her lore. Her wolf Lobo was killed before you ever met her, and she sustained injuries in that attack that left her unable to move freely. When you summon her, she appears stationary. A sniper who fires magically charged arrows from a fixed position. She cannot reposition, cannot chase enemies, and will not close the distance even if the boss walks away from her. However, she also cannot be hit by most attacks if you place her wisely, and her magic arrow damage, especially when upgraded, is substantial and sustained. The one exception to her immobility: if she is summoned near a wolf enemy, she will climb onto it and ride it around the arena, using the wolf's movement while firing from its back. Her wolf was taken from her. In death, other wolves carry her forward. The puppet you cannot share. There is only one dose of Saluvis's potion per playthrough. He gives it to you with the expectation that you will administer it to Nephili Lu, the warrior woman who appears throughout the game as an ally and questline character. If you do that, Nephili becomes the Nephili Lu puppet, a spirit Ash who fights with 2 axes and the Stormhawk axe's unique weapon. But if you give the potion to Dung Eater instead, the monster imprisoned in the sewers beneath Lendel, you get the Dung Eater puppet, a massive, aggressive spirit who wields the sword of Milos and inflicts hemorrhage. Both puppets are powerful. Choosing between them is also a moral choice, in a game full of moral choices dressed up as inventory decisions. Nephili is trying to become worthy of her father. Dung Eater exists to defile. The potion you give and the puppet you make reflect something about who you are in this world. The war dead who still fight. The war dead catacombs in Eastern Caelid, accessible only after Radan's defeat, are one of the stranger dungeons in the game. Inside, the spirits of soldiers who died in the Battle of Aeonia continue their war in the dark, Radan's soldiers and Millennia's soldiers circle and clash in endless, pointless combat. Unable to stop, unable to rest, their death having changed nothing about the fight they could not finish. You can run through them, ignore them, fight them, or watch. What you cannot do is make them stop. The Redmane Knight Ogre Ashes, Radan's longest-serving knight, are the reward waiting at the end of this dungeon. In a sense, his ashes are trapped in there with all the others, but distinguishable, set apart, waiting for someone to carry him out of the dark. The giant rat upgrade. Most spirit ashes, when upgraded, become stronger versions of the same thing. More health, more damage, the same summon count. Giant rat ashes are unique. When you upgrade them with grave gloveworts, the upgrade does not just make the rats tougher, it increases how many appear. You start with 3 giant rats at base level. By +5, that count rises to 4. At the maximum upgrade of +10, 5 rats pour into the arena. No other standard spirit ash in the base game increases its summon count through upgrades. The item description even acknowledges this quirk, noting that even as spirits, these vermin seem to multiply endlessly, and that enhancing these ashes can increase their numbers. It is a small detail buried in the upgrade system, and an important one if you enjoy the specific chaos of sending 5 enormous rats into a boss arena and watching what happens next. The Great Shield Soldiers of Nokron. Great Shield Soldier ashes summon a group of shield-carrying spirits who form a wall and advance toward the enemy. They are remarkable, less for their damage output and more for their ability to absorb punishment and maintain a boss's attention while you heal or reposition. Their lore connects them to Nokron, the Eternal City, the underground civilization buried by the Greater Will long before the events of the game. These soldiers once guarded that subterranean world, and in death, they still stand in formation, still hold their shields against whatever comes. There is something quietly moving about that. An entire culture was buried and erased from the surface world, and what remains of it is a group of soldiers who still know their job and still do it. The cockroach of the spirit world, Banished Knight Oleg, is available early and rewards players who push through the brutal gauntlet of Fringe Folk Hero's grave. A dungeon in the very starting area that includes chariot traps, a narrow corridor, and one of the game's more unpleasant boss encounters if you do not know what you are walking into. The grafted scion waiting at the end is beatable. Oleg is the reward. He dual-wields swords, attacks with remarkable aggression, and has a base health pool that lets him survive far longer than his contemporaries in the early game. He was a banished knight, one of the Order expelled from Lendl for reasons the lore suggests, but never fully states. And his fighting style reflects a warrior with nothing left to lose, which is to say, he throws himself at the enemy without hesitation. He will die eventually. He does not seem to care. The ash that connects 2 quest lines. Banished Knight Engvol's ashes are found in the Raya Lucaria Academy dungeon, specifically in the schoolhouse classroom area, in a chest. Engvol fights with a greatsword and shield, slightly more defensively than Oleg, more patient in his approach. But the interesting thing about Banished Knight ashes as a category is what they say about the world. These were knights of Lendl who were cast out, exiled, for some transgression against the Golden Order. They are not enemies of the realm, not heretics seeking to overthrow anything. Simply people deemed incompatible with the capital's standards. What does it mean that their spirits are still available for summoning, still willing to fight, still retaining enough of their former discipline to function as knights? They were cast out of life in the capital. Apparently, they were not cast out of service. The golem who would not fall. In the shadow of the Erdtree DLC, a new legendary spirit Ash was added. Telu, the golem smith. Telu is found at the heart of Telu's ruined forge in the realm of shadow. The golem's lore describes a craftsman of extraordinary skill, who forged weapons and armor even as his body corroded and failed around him. A being so committed to the act of creation that he continued working past the point any living thing would stop. As a summon, Telu is enormous, one of the physically largest spirit ashes in the game, and nearly unkillable in extended fights because he has very high health and regenerates when healed. He is not the fastest, not the highest damage dealer, but he is relentlessly present in a way that exhausts bosses who rely on burst damage. He was built to endure. He still is. The Ash who was already a corpse. There is a point in Roderica's questline where she asks you to bring her the Chrysalid's memento from Stormvale Castle. The memento is found on a pile of chrysalid husks, the shed skins of creatures mid-transformation, layered into a mound in an upper courtyard of the castle. What Roderica tells you after you bring it to her is that those husks belong to people who were grafted into Godric's castle, their bodies becoming part of the structure, their spirits trapped. She felt them as she walked past. She sensed the grief pressed into the walls. Her ability to tune spirits is not a craft she learned. It is something innate that she has carried her whole life, this sensitivity to the dead, this awareness of the boundary between what lives and what does not. Every spirit, as she upgrades, she reaches through that boundary again. The undying bond of Finlay, the path to Cleanrot Night. Finlay's ashes is itself an argument for her legendary status. You have to reach Elphael, Brace of the Haligtree, an area gated behind one of the most complex multi-step quests in the game, itself nested inside the Haligtree, itself the most hidden major dungeon in Elden Ring. Once inside Elphael, the ashes sit in a chest guarded by a Cleanrot Knight, appropriately, on a rooftop accessible only by jumping from a rafter beam above. The location mirrors the story. Reaching Finlay requires you to navigate something that by all rights should be impossible. Her in-battle behavior mirrors this too. She uses Miquella's Ring of Light, a holy projectile connected directly to the god she devoted herself to, even in death, even as Ash. Calling her into a boss fight against Millennia, the very demigod she died protecting, has a weight to it that no piece of dialogue could match. The blade that cuts off a percentage. Tisha's Blade of Death is not a flat damage ability. It deals damage as a percentage of the target's maximum health. This is significant because it means Tish scales against high health pool bosses in a way that most spirits do not. Enemies with enormous reserves of health are exactly the fights where a percentage-based cut does the most work. Against the Elden Beast, which has one of the largest health pools in the game, Tisha's attacks shred a consistent chunk regardless of that health total. She moves constantly, dodges with near supernatural timing, and never stays in one place long enough to become a reliable target. Her 132 FP cost is one of the highest in the game. Most players agree it is worth every point. Lutel's teleport is not random, it looks random. The Headless Knight blinks across the arena with no obvious pattern, appearing in a new spot, firing her spectral lance, vanishing again. But Lutel's teleport is not simply erratic movement. It is a periodic defensive behavior that allows her to reposition, avoid being surrounded, and evade area of effect attacks. While she is in the process of teleporting, she is completely immune to incoming damage. This makes her extremely difficult for most boss AI to reliably target, since the moment she becomes vulnerable in a new position, the boss must reacquire her and track to her new location before the next teleport cycle. This is not luck. This is the game faithfully translating the evasive movement style of the Mausoleum soldiers into the Spirit Ashes behavior. And Lutel, being the headless knight who leads those soldiers, executes it better than any of them. Ogre responds to your voice. The interaction between Redmane Knight Ogre and Raw-type weapon arts is one of the most specific hidden mechanics in the Spirit Ash system. If you are using a weapon with an Ash of War like Warcry, Bloodhound Step Raw variants, or any of the great Raw abilities, and you trigger it near Ogre after summoning him, he responds. He lets out a roar of his own, his stats spike temporarily with a combat buff, and then he fires a rain of gravitational arrows across the arena. An ability he uniquely shares with his student and general, Radun. This can only happen once per summon. You get one Warcry from Ogre per fight, so the timing matters. Saving your roar for a moment when it will pull maximum arrow coverage from Ogre, ideally when the boss is cornered or slowed, is a small strategic wrinkle most players stumble across by accident if they ever discover it at all. The Knight of Two Faiths. Kristoff's devotion to both Leyndell and the ancient dragons is a window into how layered the Lands Between's religious history actually is. The ancient dragons existed long before the Erdtree rose, before the Golden Order established its dominance, before any of the structures of the current world were built. The Crucible, the primordial state of the Erdtree's power, was originally tied to dragons and beasts as much as anything we would recognize as holy. Kristoff is an echo of that older synthesis, a knight who served the Erdtree's capital but still prayed to the beings that preceded it. His lightning attacks are drawn from the dragons, their ancient weapon, the thunder that predates any spell the Academy could teach. When you summon him and he calls down a bolt from the sky, you are watching a tradition that is older than Leyndell itself. The reason Mimic Tear was nerfed. At launch, the Mimic Tear was so powerful that it arguably made a significant portion of the game's boss encounters trivially easy. A fully upgraded Mimic matching your build could effectively double your damage output in a fight while also maintaining its own defensive behavior. From Software responded with patch 1.03, which reduced the direct damage output of the Mimic Tear Ash specifically. However, and this is the part the patch notes buried, the nerf only affected direct damage. Status effect buildups remained unchanged. Poison accumulation, blood loss, frostbite, all of that still applied at full rate. And the damage from those statuses was also untouched. Players who ran bleed or rot builds found that Mimic Tear was barely weakened for their purposes. The patch was surgical in a way that preserved the Ash's viability for unconventional builds, while reining in its straightforward combat dominance. The Tisha you can get without Ranni. Reaching the ringleader's Evergal, where Alecto, Tisha's mother, and the Black Knife ringleader waits, requires accessing the Moonlight Altar area of Leonia. Conventional wisdom holds that this requires completing Ranni's questline, because Ranni's questline is the main path to the Moonlight Altar. But the Moonlight Altar is physically reachable via an alternate path, the Eastern Tableland Elevator, accessed through the Grand Lift of Roll's hidden medallion route. You do not strictly need to see Ranni's questline through to unlock the Moonlight Altar physically, though Ranni's path is by far the most natural route. The Evergoal sits in the southwest corner of the Moonlight Altar Plateau. Alecto is a challenging fight, fast, elusive, and hits hard. But the reward is one of the best Spirit Ashes in the game. It is accessible earlier than most players assume. Christoph can interrupt bosses. Beyond his thunderbolt skill and lightning-imbued spear, Christoph has a secondary trick embedded in his behavior. He uses the rejection incantation, a spell that deals no damage but produces a powerful force blast. The force blast can stagger human-sized enemies, interrupting their attack animations mid-execution. Against specific bosses like Sir Gideon Ofnir, the Misbegotten Crusader, and the Leonine Misbegotten, Christoph can effectively lock them into repeated stagger cycles between his spear attacks and rejection blasts. The spell is treated as an incantation in his moveset, which means bosses that are resistant to physical interruption but vulnerable to spell stagger get a different experience fighting Christoph than they expect. He is much more tactically layered than his description suggests. The Merchant of Mines. Seluvis operates out of a tower you can find by following Rani's questline, and his opening demeanor tells you everything about him. He is dismissive, speaks to you as if your survival to his doorstep was mildly inconvenient, and immediately begins asking favors that benefit him exclusively. His stock of puppet ashes, Dolores the Sleeping Arrow puppet, Jar White puppet, Finger Maiden Therolina puppet, are available for purchase as if they are normal goods. Each one was a person. Seluvis does not distinguish between a person and a commodity, and his pricing reflects that indifference. The Finger Maiden Therolina puppet, for instance, was a finger maiden, one of the servants of the two fingers, the intermediaries through which the greater will communicated with the lands between. She was part of a sacred order. Seluvis sells her ashes between mundane wares as if the category difference is trivial. The potion and the point of no return. Seluvis gives you his potion with a specific target in mind. Nefeli Lu. She is the daughter of Gideon Ofnir, adopted, raised to be a warrior, and she spends much of her questline trying to reconcile her father's cold manipulation with her own sense of purpose. She wants to be worthy. She is earnest in a game full of deception. Administering Seluvis's potion to her, making her a puppet, is one of the more quietly devastating options in the game. The Nefeli Lu puppet fights exactly as you might expect. 2 axes, aggressive, fierce. But that fierceness is not hers anymore. The will behind those axes is Seluvis's, or yours, or nobody's. She is a fighter with the fighter's memory and the fighter's body, and nothing else. The Dung Eater cannot be puppeted without confrontation. The process of administering Seluvis's potion to the Dung Eater is not simple. You first have to locate his physical body, which is imprisoned in the sewers beneath Lendl, the subterranean shunning grounds. You have to release him. He then begins leaving notes and invading your world as a phantom, hunting you down. The questline asks you to gather seedbed curses from corpses he has defiled and bring them to him, advancing his horrible mission step by step until you have finally enough leverage to administer the potion. You spend a significant portion of the mid to late game doing terrible things adjacent to the Dung Eater before the puppet ash becomes available. The reward: a massively powerful spirit who fights without hesitation and inflicts hemorrhage, is powerful enough that some players consider the moral compromise worth it. The archer who was sold away. Dolores the Sleeping Arrow puppet does not have an elaborate lore backstory layered in item descriptions the way Latenna or Tish does. What she has is a name that implies a life, a type, archer puppet, that implies a skill set, and a context that implies a history of being objectified and sold. Seluvis's operation is one of supply and demand. He has puppets, you want summons. The transaction proceeds. Dolores fires arrows from range, maintains distance, and is reasonably effective against medium difficulty encounters. The detail most players notice is that her archery style is competent and controlled, the way an archer who trained for years would fight, not the way an automaton would. Whatever she was before Seluvis's potion, she was trained. She was someone with a history. The puppet remembers the technique even when nothing else remains. Puppets do not consume FP the same way. The puppet ashes are all classified as special ashes and upgraded with ghost gloveworts, rather than grave gloveworts. This places them in the same upgrade tier as the legendary ashes, acknowledging that the process of puppet creation results in a qualitatively different kind of spirit than a conventional summon. The difference is thematically important. Conventional spirits are dead people or creatures who chose to remain, who were buried with honors, who left ashes behind as a natural consequence of their death. Puppets were not allowed to die. Their wills were overwritten while their bodies persisted. When you summon a puppet, you are not calling a ghost. You are activating something that is still, in some sense, alive, or at least still operating on biological systems rather than purely spectral ones. The Jarwhite's hidden life. The Jarwhite puppet is one of the more quietly strange entries in Seluvis's collection. The item description calls the spirit a man who wished to become the innards of a living jar, a jar-hurling specialist. That phrase stops you if you read it closely. This was someone who aspired to something most people would find incomprehensible, to be absorbed into one of the living jar creatures of the lands between, to become part of them. The warrior jars, enormous ceramic beings who fill themselves with the remains of fallen fighters to grow stronger, apparently attracted devotion of a specific and unusual kind. Based on what the description implies, the Jarwhite likely served the Jar community of Jarberg, or perhaps a wandering warrior Jar like Alexander, aspiring to the honor of becoming their innards. Seluvis reduced this strange devotion to a purchase option in his tower. The Finger Maiden's irony. Finger Maidens serve the two fingers, the intermediaries of the greater will, the cosmic force that established the Golden Order, and the Erd Tree's dominance over life and death in the lands between. They are sacred functionaries. They anoint tarnished who have been chosen for the journey toward becoming Elden Lord. Therolina, the Finger Maiden who became Seluvis's puppet, was one of these. A woman embedded in the very system that gave the tarnished their purpose. The irony is rich. A servant of the greater will, the divine order that governs resurrection and lordship, ends up as a puppet that can be purchased from a sorcerer in a tower. The greater will's reach apparently has limits. Seluvis found one of them. The difference between ash and puppet. In lore terms, ashen remains are items in which the spirit of a dead being still dwells. They are containers for something that chose, or was chosen, to persist. Puppet ashes are something different. They are alive people packaged as if they were dead, their wills suppressed and their bodies commandeered for someone else's use. The game acknowledges this distinction by calling them specifically puppet, rather than ashes, in most of their naming. But the summoning mechanic is the same. The bell rings. Something appears to fight for you. The difference between voluntary devotion and involuntary imprisonment is invisible to the boss on the other end of the fight. That is perhaps the most unsettling thing about the puppet system. It works just as well. The cost of Seluvis's questline. If you advance Seluvis's questline to its natural conclusion, giving him potion opportunities, enabling his research, not killing him early, you eventually discover that his ultimate goal was to turn Ranni herself into a puppet. He wants to control the witch demigod who set the entire questline in motion. Rani herself, if she is alive when this is discovered, eliminates him. The questline ends abruptly. Whatever puppets he was working on, whatever research he had left, dies with him. The puppets already sold remain available. The project he was building toward collapses. It is a fitting conclusion for a man who saw everything as a resource to be owned. He reached for something beyond his ability to contain, and it removed him. The puppet sold after its maker dies. Some of Seluvis's puppet stock becomes unavailable if you kill him or advance his questline to its collapse. But a portion of his inventory, specifically the puppets he had already completed before the end, remain purchasable through another merchant if you know to look. The round table hold has channels for trade to pass through, even after individual vendors die. This is a mechanical necessity for player access, but it is also strangely appropriate lore-wise. Seluvis is gone, but the puppets outlast him. The products remain on the market after the producer is dead. Commerce continues. The people he overrode continue to be sold. The true purpose of gloveworts. Gloveworts are the upgrade materials for spirit ashes. Grave gloveworts, found in the catacombs scattered across the lands between, upgrade standard ashes. Ghost gloveworts, rarer and more deeply buried, upgrade special and legendary ashes. The flowers themselves grow in places where the dead rest, catacomb walls, underground chambers, the edge of burial grounds. They are plants that bloom in close proximity to death, sustained by whatever energy the spirits trapped in those spaces emit. Offering them to Rodrika, who then uses them in her spirit tuning, is a process of giving death back to the dead. The flowers that grew from the energy of the spirits go back into strengthening those same spirits. It is a closed loop, a cycle of mourning transformed into something that gives the dead more power to protect the living. What the Rebirth Monument actually is. The Rebirth Monument is never fully explained in the game itself, but its name and placement contain a thesis. They are called Rebirth Monuments. They appear near every boss arena. They mark thresholds between ordinary space and the places where exceptional violence, death, and transformation have occurred. The word rebirth is not casual. In the lore of the lands between, death is not supposed to be permanent. The Erd Tree was meant to receive the dead and return them to new life. When that cycle was broken, when the Elden Ring shattered and the rune of death was stolen and death became truly final, something had to hold the gap. The monuments are arguably anchors of that older system, places where the concept of return is still strong enough to permit a bell to reach through. Spirits cannot be summoned in multiplayer zones. When another player joins your world through summoning or invasion, your spirit ash summon vanishes if you have one active. You cannot have both a spirit ash and a human phantom in your world simultaneously. This is presented as a game rule, and it largely is, but it gestures at something that tracks with the lore. Phantom summoning, calling real human players from adjacent timelines, and spirit ash summoning, calling the genuinely dead, operate on different principles. Having both in the same space may simply be beyond what the mechanism allows, or perhaps the spirits, still tethered to one world's timeline at a time, cannot persist when the borders between realities are already stressed by the presence of multiple tarnished. The death that was not a death, Godwyn the Golden, slain on the night of the Black Knives, with Tish's blade carrying a fragment of the rune of death. His death was unusual. He died in body, but not in soul. Or rather, his soul survived while his body died, the opposite of what the stolen rune of death was designed to do. This half-death produced something monstrous. Godwyn's body continued to grow beneath the ground, his corrupted flesh spreading through the earth in a substance called the Death Root. The Black Knife Tish ashes, when you look at them from this angle, are not simply an assassin's remains. They are the ashes of someone who participated in an incomplete act, a murder that left a wound in the world that has not closed. The blade that started it all still cuts at a percentage of maximum health in boss arenas across the lands between. The crystalline ashes and the primordial crystal. Crystalline ashes summon a group of crystallians. The crystalline enemies encountered in various academy-adjacent locations and dungeons. The crystallians are not living beings in the conventional sense. They were created by the crystallians, ancient beings who used primordial crystal to forge their bodies, and who served the Academy of Raya Lucaria in its early days. They are creatures of pure crystalline matter, which makes them resistant to physical strikes and vulnerable to strike damage that shatters crystalline structures. As spirit ashes, they retain this nature. They resist most attacks, hit reasonably hard with their ring blades, and take significantly more damage from hammer and club weapons. The game does not explain this in the summon interface. You learn it by watching them absorb everything until a player with a club shows up and pops them like ornaments. The banishment that made knights. The banished knights as a faction represent one of the more interesting mysteries in Elden Ring's political backstory. These were knights of Leyndell, trained, honored, presumably loyal, who were cast out. The reason for the banishment is never fully stated in any single item description. Scattered details across various pieces of equipment suggest that some were exiled for heresy, some for failure, some for breaking the strict codes of Leyndell's knightly order in ways that the capital deemed unforgivable. What they share is a post-exile existence of mercenary service, wandering the lands between and fighting wherever they can find a purpose. Several of them appear as dungeon bosses. Their spirit ashes, Oleg, Engvall, and others, are among the more reliable early and mid-game summons precisely because these were trained professionals who never stopped training, even after everything else was taken from them. The Ancestor Spirit and the Old Way. The Ancestor Spirit boss and the Ancestral Follower, ashes you earn from defeating it, represent something the Erdtree-dominated world of Elden Ring has largely buried. The Great Stag itself belongs to a pre-Erdtree spiritual tradition, a reverence for the old creatures of the land that existed before any god claimed dominion, the followers who tended to it in life. The antlered folk of the underground maintained that tradition in the dark while the world above reorganized itself under a new order. The Erdtree replaced these older beliefs with its own orthodoxy, but the traditions did not fully disappear. They went underground, literally in the case of the Ancestor Spirit, which inhabits Siofra River beneath Limgrave. To earn the Ancestral Follower ashes from that fight, to carry a fragment of that world's devotion into battle, is a small act of recovering something that was buried. The Great Stag does not know it was supposed to be forgotten. Nephili's ashes fight like she did. The Nephili Lu puppet, when used as a summon, employs the Stormhawk axes, the same weapon type Nephili uses throughout her appearances in the game as an NPC ally. She is aggressive, charges into melee range without hesitation, and hits hard with dual-wielded strikes. Watching the Nephili puppet fight, you can see exactly who she was before Seluvis's potion. A trained warrior with excellent fundamentals, a drive to engage that made her effective in every fight where she appeared as a helper. The puppet retains all of that. What it loses, what the item description does not say, but the silence around it implies, is the reason she fought that way. Nephili fought because she was trying to become someone her father would recognize as worthy. The puppet fights because something tells it to. the spirit of Roderica's past. Roderica's Crimson Hood, once she becomes the spirit tuner at Round Table Hold, is left behind in Stormvale Castle. You can find it on the pile of chrysalids in the same spot where the chrysalid's memento was. The hood's description suggests, without stating outright, that Roderica was of noble birth in her homeland, sent on a mission to the lands between, not out of purpose, but to be rid of her. The wording implies a family that no longer wanted her, rather than one that entrusted her with a genuine task. Her sensitivity to spirits, her natural talent for the work Hugh eventually recognizes in her, none of that was valued where she came from. She came to the lands between alone and afraid, and found a calling in the place where she had nothing. The spirit jellyfish ashes she gives you, Aurelia May, based on the depth of care she extends toward that spirit, have been a companion she bonded with during that lonely journey. It is the kind of connection you form when you have very little else. Whether that reading is exactly right or not, the tenderness of the gift is undeniable. The one who guards the soulless. Lutel's connection to the walking mausoleums is worth sitting with. These enormous structures, covered in stone and bone-white decoration, wander the Weeping Peninsula and the mountaintops of the giants carrying the sarcophagi of soulless demigods. Beings who have lost their great rune but whose bodies persist, waiting for revival. Lutel and the mausoleum soldiers protect these wandering monuments. They are not guarding treasure. They are not guarding a territory. They are guarding the possibility of return. Every fight with a mausoleum knight is a fight with someone whose job is to protect the maybe of a god coming back. Lutel died doing this and chose to keep doing it. What could inspire that level of devotion to a guard post is not explained, but the devotion itself, the persistence of it past death, is one of the more quietly moving things in a game full of quiet tragedy. The first summon you can get, before you reach the first sight of grace that triggers Melina's appearance, before you have the spirit calling bell, before the system even opens up to you, there is one spirit encounter embedded into the tutorial. In the Chapel of Anticipation, the game's opening area, the grafted scion kills you and sends you to the stranded graveyard below. There, in the first dungeon of the game, you encounter the Fringe Folk hero's grave, a dungeon protected by chariot traps and skeleton archers. At the very end of it is the boss who drops banished Knight Oleg's ashes, but you cannot summon him yet. You do not have the bell. The game places one of its most useful early game spirits at the bottom of its very first optional dungeon, gated behind a system you have not unlocked. It is the game's version of showing you the door before explaining what doors are. The hound who never found a master, Bloodhound Knight. Flo's ashes are found in Gelmir Hero's grave on Mount Gelmir, at the end of a dungeon full of lava and chariot traps that most players find deeply unpleasant. He is not a standard banished knight and not a named figure in the game's major questlines. What the item description actually gives you is a small, bleak character study. It calls him the Rabid Stray, notes he attacks without pause the instant he is summoned, and then delivers the detail that defines him entirely. Flo vowed that there was only one lord he would ever serve, a true king. And so, the Rabid Stray never found a master. He spent his life as an unmatched fighter, holding himself to an impossible standard, waiting for someone worthy, and died still waiting. As a summon, he attacks without hesitation the moment he appears, as if he has been waiting to fight since before you called him. In a way, he has been. The Nox and their lost sky, the people of Nokron and the deeper eternal cities, were not always underground. They were exiled there, cast beneath the earth by the greater will After they transgressed against the established cosmic order in some way, the game never fully explains. The most widely held interpretation among players, pieced together from item descriptions and environmental storytelling, is that the Nox attempted to create something, a lord, a vessel of power, that the greater will had not sanctioned. The Mimic Tear is the clearest evidence of this, its description stating directly that it was the Eternal City's attempt to forge a lord. As for the astral creature, the most coherent reading is that it may have been summoned or created to reclaim the sky from which the Nox were exiled. Though the game is deliberately ambiguous on this point, what is beyond doubt is that the Nox kept building, kept reaching, even buried. Every spirit ash connected to Nokron, the Mimic Tear, the Great Shield soldiers, the Clayman Ashes, carries this background. The remnants of a people who refuse to stop, even in the dark, even after everything the greater will took from them. The talisman switch. There is a technique built around the Shabriri's woe talisman. A grim little amulet shaped like a gouged out face that causes enemies to fixate on whoever is wearing it. The trick is elegant and requires understanding how the Mimic Tear processes your equipment at the moment of summoning. Equip Shabriri's woe before summoning the Mimic. The copy spawns with the talisman already equipped in its loadout, meaning enemies treat the Mimic as the primary target. Then you remove Shabriri's woe from your own slot and replace it with a more useful talisman. The boss's attention remains glued to the Mimic, which carries the aggro drawing property, while you fight freely with a more optimal setup. It is a two-step process that takes seconds to execute and can completely change the flow of a boss fight you have been struggling against. Most players who discover it find it almost by accident. The Cursed Blood Pot Repositioner, Redmane Knight Ogre, has a specific behavioral quirk that becomes a tactical consideration in large arenas. He is essentially stationary once summoned. He plants himself near where he appeared, fires his gravity arrows from that position, and does not meaningfully pursue mobile bosses. For fights in open or wide arenas where the boss spends much of its time on the opposite side of the room, Ogre can end up just standing idle while the fight happens far away from him. There is a solution. Throwing a Cursed Blood Pot on the ground near where you want Ogre to be will cause him to relocate to that spot. The pot works as a repositioning tool. Toss it in front of the boss. Watch Ogre move, and suddenly his gravity arrows have range on the target again. It is one of the more specific interact with the environment tricks in the Spirit Ash system, and barely anyone knows it. The Lone Wolves have a buff. The Lone Wolf Ashes are one of the first spirit summons many players use, given by Renna the Witch at the Church of Elle, alongside the Spirit Calling Bell itself. 3 wolves, fast-moving, decent at splitting boss attention, nothing obviously exceptional. But there is a mechanical property embedded in the wolf pack that most players never notice. The wolves do not simply attack independently. They cycle aggro in a coordinated way, with one wolf typically engaging while the others flank or reposition. This cycling is subtle enough that it looks like chaotic AI behavior, but it is consistent enough that veterans describe it as genuinely strategic. Against enemies with slow, targeted attacks, the wolves' cycling keeps at least one of them alive longer than you might expect from creatures with such low individual health pools. The wolves' lore is also quietly touching. The description says they were spirits of wolves chased from their pack, who later encountered a nameless Tarnished and welcomed them as hunting companions. They were already outcasts before you found them. Upgrading changes more than just stats. When you bring Glove Wards to Roderica and upgrade a Spirit Ash, the description says the Ash's attack power and defenses increase, That is the stated effect. But for certain ashes, upgrading changes something more fundamental. The giant rat ashes are the clearest example. Enhancing them at higher levels increases the number of giant rats summoned, not just their individual strength. The skeletal militiaman ashes do not gain additional skeletons, but their overall durability increases in ways that meaningfully extend how long they stay in the fight. The system presents itself as a flat improvement to existing capabilities, and for most ashes that is exactly what it is. But the giant rat upgrade is the system's most notable non-linear secret. One of those details that rewards players who experiment rather than rely on what the interface tells them. Spirits retain faction-specific resistances. The game does not explain this directly, but spirit ashes summoned from a specific faction appear to carry the resistances and vulnerabilities of their original enemy type. Crystallian ashes take additional damage from strike weapons, but shrug off slash and pierce damage, consistent with how Crystallian enemies behave. Skeletal ashes take more damage from holy damage, consistent with how skeleton enemies across the game respond to sacred attacks. These carryovers are not stated in any item description. They appear to be inherited from the underlying enemy design of each creature type. Whether every faction consistently passes on its resistances to its Spirit Ash version is not comprehensively documented, and some of these interactions may simply reflect shared base data rather than deliberate design choices. What is clear is that bringing a club to a fight where you summoned Crystallians, or using holy attacks against your own skeleton summons by accident, has mechanical consequences the game never warns you about. The Dragonkin Soldier Ash. Most players never encounter the Dragonkin Soldier Spirit Ash because it requires defeating a specific boss in a specific underground location that many players skip entirely. The Dragonkin Soldier of Noxtella drops the ashes in the Ainsel River main area, an underground region reachable either through the Ainsel River well in Leonia or through Ranni's questline via the Sending Coffin from the Renner's Rise Tower. The Dragonkin Soldier Ash summons an enormous lightning-aspected reptilian creature that uses sweeping slam attacks and thunder strikes. It is one of the more visually striking summons in the game, and mechanically, one of the tankier options for its tier. But because Noxtella is optional, reachable through multiple indirect routes, and not signposted, many players complete the entire game without knowing the Dragonkin Ash exists. The summoning sound. When you ring the spirit calling bell and summon an ash, there is a distinct audio cue, a resonant, layered chime that blends bell tone with something more organic, almost vocal. The sound was designed specifically for the Spirit Ash system, and many players have noted that there are subtle variations between summons. Standard ashes tend to produce a simpler, quieter ring at the moment of appearance, while more powerful summons, legendary ashes especially, carry what sounds like a fuller, more resonant tone. Whether these differences are formally tiered in the audio design or are simply a product of the unique visual effects accompanying each summon is something that is difficult to confirm without direct access to the sound files. What is beyond dispute is that the experience of summoning Black Knife Taish feels sonically different from summoning a skeletal militiaman. That distinction, deliberate or incidental, is part of the craft. Spirits do not scale with your level. Your character in Elden Ring becomes more powerful as you level up. More health, more stamina, more attack or defense depending on where you invest your runes. Spirit ashes do not follow this curve. A lone wolf ash summoned at level 10 has the same base statistics as one summoned at level 180. The only way to increase a spirit ash's power is through Roderica's upgrades using glove woods. This creates a consistent dynamic where low upgrade ashes become relatively weaker as you progress through the game's scaling, even as your character grows stronger. The solution is to commit to upgrading the ashes you use regularly. The ashes themselves never grow on their own. They are fixed at whatever state the dead left them in. The spirit who heals, depraved. Perfumer Karman is one of the game's more unusual spirit ashes, not for his offensive output, which is moderate at best, but for a behavior he shares with his living counterparts. Karman can heal himself mid-combat. Depraved perfumers use experimental concoctions on themselves, and Karman's ash retains this self-restoration behavior, occasionally drinking from an aromatic mixture when his health drops. In prolonged fights against enemies that deal damage in short bursts rather than sustained pressure, this self-healing can extend his survivability meaningfully. His lore is equally interesting. The description notes that Karman was searching for a secret physic of revivification, a formula that could restore life to the dead. He was a healer in philosophy, pursuing something that ran directly against the Erdtree's monopoly on resurrection. He never found it. His ash keeps looking. The wolves that can do more. The lone wolf ashes are the default summon given by Renna alongside the spirit calling bell at the Church of LA, and they sit in most players' inventories as an early game crutch that gets replaced as soon as something better comes along. But wolves have a property that later ashes rarely replicate. 3 independent bodies for the cost of a single summon. In encounters with small arenas and fast-moving enemies, 3 wolves spreading in different directions at the start of a fight is one of the better aggro-splitting tools available at low upgrade levels. The wolves also have the ability to flank without being commanded to. Their AI naturally positions them to attack from multiple angles. Against humanoid enemies especially, this flanking creates vulnerabilities in the enemy's guard that a single summon cannot produce. They are not the strongest. They are, in 3-on-1 mathematics, one of the most disruptive. The Fire That Scales, Black Flame Monk. Amun carries a property that makes him more effective at lower upgrade levels than most spirit ashes. His Black Flame spells deal damage as a percentage of enemy maximum health. The Black Flame is the fire of God-slaying, and its defining characteristic across every implementation in the game, weapon, spell, or spirit, is this percentage-based damage component. Against bosses with enormous health pools, a Black Flame attack from Amun at even a modest upgrade level deals more effective damage than a standard physical attack from a more heavily upgraded spirit. He costs 115 FP and requires navigating an optional area of the hidden path to the Haligtree. Invisible walkways above a large chamber, crossing air that looks like nothing. But for mid-game encounters against high-health bosses, Amun at +1 outperforms many spirits at +8. The Man Who Erased His Feelings, Omen Killer. Rollo's item description is one of the more quietly devastating entries in the Spirit Ash catalogue. Rollo was before he became an Omen Killer, a famous perfumer, a skilled practitioner of an art form that involves creating aromatic mixtures, a profession that in the lands between carries connotations of refinement and expertise. But the work of hunting omen was considered nightmarish, monstrous, necessary, and incompatible with empathy. So Rollo drank a physic to rid himself of emotion entirely. He destroyed his own capacity for feeling in order to do the job. What remained was the Omen Killer, effective, brutal, unbothered. His ashes are obtained by defeating the Fell Twins on the bridge outside the Divine Tower of East Altus, a location that requires having already defeated Morgoth the Omen King. In a way, Rollo hunting Omen in life ended with you receiving his ashes from a fight against two Omen. The world loops. The first traitor. Armin's description is uncharacteristically direct about what he did, and then offers a second reading that muddies it beautifully. It says he swore fealty to the god-slaying Black Flame and became the first fire monk to turn traitor. Then it says, or perhaps it is better said that he fled from the giant's flame, out of cowardice. The giant's flame is the ancient fire at the top of the mountaintops of the giants, the fire monks swore to protect and carry. Abandoning it for the Black Flame was either a principled betrayal, choosing a different power on purpose, or simple fear. The item description refuses to commit to either reading, presenting both and leaving the question suspended. Aemon himself is ashes. He cannot clarify. The two interpretations of his life sit inside a parenthetical and never resolve. The perfumer chasing immortality. Carmun was a depraved perfumer. One of the heresy-inclined practitioners who used aromatic spices on themselves, altering body and mind through self-experimentation. Their slow deterioration from their own art earned them the label depraved. The description notes Carmen's pursuit of a secret physic of revivification, a formula to bring back the dead. This puts him in an interesting position relative to the world's broader conflict over death and resurrection. The Erdtree monopolized return to life for ages. The rune of death was stolen specifically to make death permanent and break that monopoly. Carmun apparently was trying to work around all of that through chemistry. He believed a perfumer's craft could do what a god's tree claimed exclusive jurisdiction over. His ashes sit in Volcano Manor behind an illusory wall, inside a room most players never find. The knight who served the serpent and rebelled. Black Knight Commander Andreas is one of the new spirit ashes added in Shadow of the Erdtree, and his story is a small tragedy embedded in the DLC's broader narrative. Andreas was the first commander of Messmer's Black Knights, the military force that carried out Messmer's campaign in the realm of Shadow. He was powerful, capable, and devout in his following of Messmer's cause. But then he discovered the truth of his liege's nature. Messmer was not simply a fierce warrior of the Golden Order, but something more disturbing. A being intertwined with serpents in a way that violated the world as Andreas understood it. Andreas chose rebellion. He refused to continue serving. His reward for this principled stand was imprisonment in an underground tomb. His ashes dropped from a boss in the Fog Rift catacombs, accessed by an unusual method. You have to ride a spike trap platform upward to reach the room where they wait. The Dragon Knight without a dragon. Ancient Dragon Knight. Kristoff's title says everything about what he valued, and nothing about whether the things he valued were compatible. He was a Leyndell Knight, dedicated to the capital's defense, loyal to the Erdtree and the structures of the Golden Order. He was also an ancient dragon devotee, which in the era of Leyndell's dominance meant worshipping something that predated, and in some ways competed with the Erdtree's claim to cosmic primacy. He was never a dragon himself, never dragonkin, never transformed. He was simply a human knight who maintained a private worship of creatures who came before the world he served, and who used the thunder they commanded as his weapon of choice. In that sense, Kristoff is a portrait of someone who held two loyalties that should have been in tension and somehow made them coexist. His grave is somewhere in Leyndell. His spirit is available to anyone willing to reach the sainted hero's grave. The soldier in the cave who cannot leave. Banished Knight Engvol's ashes are found in the Raya Lucaria Crystal Tunnel, a mine inside the Academy region. specifically in the schoolhouse classroom area. Getting there requires navigating the tunnel and its crystal golems and reaching the upper academic section of the area. Engvall fights with a greatsword, more measured than Oleg's dual sword aggression, more patient in his targeting. The banished knights as a group are defined by what they lost rather than what they were. Before banishment, each one was part of a prestigious order, bound by codes of conduct and sworn to a capital. After banishment, they wander, fight for whoever employs them, and adapt. Engvall's ashes are inside an academy-adjacent mine, which is about as far from Lendil as you can get while remaining in the same general region of the world. He never made it home. His spirit stays in the cave. The kindred who serves rot. The kindred of rot ashes summon two small, insect-like creatures draped in the textures of something between a maggot and a crustacean. They hail from the rot-affected areas of the lands between, specifically the rot-flooded regions associated with scarlet rot spread. As spirits, they are fast and frenzied in their attacks, applying scarlet rot buildup to enemies through their biting strikes, which makes them surprisingly effective in fights where rot vulnerability can be exploited. Their lore is tied to the concept of creatures that have adapted to survive in an environment that should be lethal. Things born from or conditioned by the rot, rather than destroyed by it. They are not survivors of the rot, they are its children, and when summoned, they bring that heritage with them. The vulgar militia who serves. The vulgar militia ashes summon a trio of the wild club-wielding fighters found in the Weeping Peninsula and other open-world areas. They are not trained soldiers, not knights, not practitioners of any formal combat tradition. They are exactly what their name implies. Rough, violent, untrained fighters who overwhelm through aggression and numbers. As spirit ashes, 3 of them charge into combat without any pretense of tactical coordination, which is actually their strength. Bosses that have complex AI routines for targeting individuals get confused by 3 simultaneous aggressors converging from different angles. The militia does not fight smart. It fights loud and fast and wrong in a way that disrupts whatever the boss planned to do next. For their modest FP cost, they represent chaos as strategy. The marionette that was built for war. Marionette soldier. Ashes summon one of the mechanical puppet soldiers found in the Academy of Raya Lucaria and its associated territories. These are not dead people shaped into service. They are constructed things, built to fight, given form and function through the Academy's sorcerous craft. The marionettes that appear as enemies throughout the Liurnia region attack with crossbow bolts and blade arms, mechanically precise in the way a machine is, rather than the way a trained fighter is. Their spirit ash carries the same behavior. Reliable ranged harassment, moderate melee, no heroism, no grief, no personal history encoded in the way they move. They fight because they were made to fight. That distinction between constructed purpose and evolved devotion sits at the heart of what separates the marionette Ash from every named spirit in the game. The perfumer who uses herself. Perfumer Trisha is a counterpart to Carmen. A standard, non-depraved perfumer who appears as a spirit Ash, obtainable through completing her associated questline content. While Carmen pursues power and forbidden knowledge, Trisha's spirit Ash leans into the supportive and debuffing aspects of perfumery, using fire and aromatic bursts to create zones of pressure rather than direct damage. The perfumers in the lands between sit in a peculiar social position. Skilled artisans whose craft borders on alchemy, whose most extreme practitioners either devoted themselves entirely to self-experimentation or turned their gifts toward power seeking. Trisha seems to have stayed on the more restrained side of that divide. Her ash is still volatile in combat, still capable of fire damage, but she reads as someone who used her art with some restraint intact. The Kaiden Sellsword, who keeps swinging. Kaiden Sellsword ashes summon a single large, fur-wearing fighter from the nomadic Kaiden people. Warriors encountered in camps across the Weeping Peninsula, and Limgrave who fight with curved greatswords, and a ferocity that outlasts most conventional enemies. The Kaiden are not tied to any faction, not loyal to any demigod, not part of the Golden Order's structures or opposed to them in any organized way. They are simply fighters who move through the world on their own terms. The Spirit Ash reflects this. No special techniques, no magic, no tricks. Just a heavy curved sword and an intent to keep using it until something stops. The Kaiden Sellsword is one of the earliest special ashes available and one of the most straightforward. A reminder that in a game full of elaborate lore and intricate systems, sometimes what you need is a competent person with a large blade and nowhere else to be. What Spirit Ash summoning actually is, the Spirit Calling Bell, the Rebirth Monuments, the whole system of calling the dead back into service. It is not a technology invented for the player's convenience. Spirit Ash summoning is a practice with roots in the lands between's pre-Erdtree history, connected to traditions of ancestor veneration and the belief that the dead could still serve the living if properly invited. The bell is the invitation. The ash is the remnant through which the spirit is still tethered to the physical world. Roderika's spirit tuning, her ability to strengthen these ashes, extends this tradition into something more active, a form of communion between the living and the dead that treats the spirit not as a servant, but as a presence that can grow, that can become more fully itself with care and the right materials. The whole system is, underneath the combat application, an act of grief that keeps its object alive. The Night Maiden and the Swordstress. The Night Maiden and Swordstress puppets are a pair of spirits obtained in Nokron, Eternal City, and they are categorized as puppets rather than standard spirit ashes, though they were not puppets in the same sense as Celevis's creations. These two were already bound in service to the Silver Tier ecology of Nokron, already functioning as an integrated unit before they became ash-summoned companions. They fight together with complementary techniques. The Night Maiden uses ranged attacks and repositioning. The Swordstress engages in direct melee combat, and they juggle boss attention in a way that two completely independent spirits would not. The pairing reflects the Nox people's understanding of combat as a collaborative system, rather than an individual feat. The civilization that built mimic tiers to forge a lord also, apparently, trained its defenders to work in tandem. The Oracle Envoys of the Erdtree. Oracle Envoy Ashes summon a small group of the rotund, white-robed creatures found within the Erdtree and adjacent sacred locations. Oracle Envoys are among the stranger beings in the lands between. They appear to be servants or extensions of the Erdtree itself, carrying ceremonial pipes that produce golden rings of sound used as projectile attacks. They are not fighters in any conventional sense, more like sacred functionaries who happen to be capable of combat. As spirit ashes, they carry the same golden ring projectile attacks and float toward enemies with the unhurried pace of something that does not believe in urgency. Their damage is real, if not exceptional. Their cultural significance, as servants of the very god structure that defines the lands between, makes the act of summoning them into a boss fight a curious inversion. Erdtree servants doing a tarnished's bidding, the misbegotten and what they were before. The misbegotten are one of the recurring enemy types in Elden Ring. Beast-like creatures with lion features, matted fur, and enormous weapons. They appear across many different regions and have a complex social history embedded in scattered item descriptions. The misbegotten were, before the era of the Erd Tree's full dominance, beings with a different status in the world. The Golden Order's rise classified them as lesser beings, and they were enslaved and exiled. The ashes related to misbegotten enemies reflect this history. These are not creatures who served the structures of the lands between voluntarily. Their presence in the spirit ash system, when it occurs through adjacent lore, carries the weight of something that was never given the choice to serve or not. The thorn that predates the tree, the crucible, the primordial state of the Erd Tree's essence before it crystallized into the Golden Order's forms, is represented across the lands between in Crucible Knights and the incantations that draw on that older power. Ancient Dragon Knight Kristoff is connected to this lineage through his devotion to the ancient dragons, who existed when the Crucible was still the dominant force in the world. The Crucible Knights themselves, as spirit ashes, carry ancient combat techniques and Crucible aspects. Tail whips, fire breath, the ancient wing-like forms that the current Erd Tree has moved past. Summoning a Crucible Knight Ash into a modern boss fight is an act of reaching back past the current world order into something older. The techniques are slower, heavier, less refined by the standards of the present age. They are also, in many encounters, extremely effective. The Clayman and the underground civilization. The Clayman ashes summon one of the pale humanoid creatures found throughout the Eternal Cities. Claymen are beings of the Nox people's civilization. They are, as best the lore implies, people who were reduced or transformed into a diminished state through the long centuries of living underground without access to the surface world's light and resources. They attack with magic, move with a slightly unsettling fluidity, and lack the definition of fully realized human forms. As a spirit ash, the Clayman is a modest power summon, primarily useful in the early to mid-game against groups. But the lore context makes summoning them quietly, melancholy. These are people who went underground when their civilization was exiled and came back up in a form that is no longer quite what they were. The cost of centuries in the dark is written into their bodies. The sacred tear and the spirit. There is a detail embedded in the spirit ash upgrade system that most players never consciously connect to the larger lore. The flowers Roderica uses, grave gloveworts and ghost gloveworts, grow in the catacombs and underground chambers where the dead are laid to rest. In the lore of the lands between, places of death accumulate a kind of spiritual energy as souls pass through them on their way to or from the Erd Tree. The gloveworts bloom from that energy, photosynthesizing death itself. When Roderica uses these flowers to strengthen spirit ashes, she is completing a cycle that the Erd Tree system was supposed to handle. Souls leaving the dead, nourishing the earth, being gathered back and offered to the spirits that remain. Except in the Erd Tree system, that energy went up the tree and into new life. In Roderica's hands, it goes back into the ashes. The dead feed the dead, and the circle holds. The ancestral follower and the before time. The ancestral follower ashes summon one of the tall, antlered, spectral beings found in Siofra River and Mogwin Palace. Entities that exist between the living and the dead in a way that is distinct from either the Erd Tree cycle or the Nox's buried civilization. Ancestral followers appear to worship or attend the ancestor spirits. the great stag forms of pre-Erdtree natural power. They are, in the simplest terms, a remnant priesthood tending to gods that the Golden Order declared irrelevant. Their spirit Ash summons a solitary follower who fights with both melee and magic, drawing on the bone and antler aesthetic of their tradition. Summoning one into combat is a small act of acknowledging that the lands between contain something before the current world's rules decided what mattered. The Avionet and the Stolen Sky. The Avionet soldier Ashes summon one of the mechanical wing soldiers encountered in Volcano Manor and Raya Lucaria. Avionets are constructs, machines built by the Academy with wings and bladed arms, designed for aerial harassment and support. They do not have lore in the traditional sense. No individual backstory, no named history, no person inside the shell. They are tools that happen to be spirit-aspected in the way that all things in the lands between seem to accumulate spirit. As a summon, an Avionet harasses enemies from above with his wing blades and dart attacks, difficult to target because of its movement pattern. The interesting question their existence raises is not who they were, but why the Academy found it necessary to build them, and what kind of enemy required not just soldiers, but soldiers who could fly. The Land Squirt and what it says. Among the 84 spirit ashes in Elden Ring is one called Land Squirt. It summons a small, passive-aggressive sea creature that clings to the ground and fires projectiles at enemies. Land Squirts are the plant-like creatures encountered in various coastal and swamp environments. They look like animate fungi crossed with sea anemones and attack by spitting something acidic at whatever passes too close. The Land Squirt Ash is exactly as absurd as it sounds in a game that also offers you legendary assassins and ancient dragons. A mushroom creature you wring out of ashes to spit acid at bosses. From Software included it alongside Tiche and Lutel and Mimic Tear, without apparent irony. The Land Squirt has 84 companions in the Ash roster. It is not better than most of them, but it is in there, fully realized, with a summon animation and upgrade path, and a place in the world that makes a kind of perfect sense if you accept that the lands between is a place where everything, living or not, leaves something behind. The dragon who served her new lord, ancient dragon Florisax, is obtained through one of Shadow of the Erdtree's most emotionally resonant questlines. Florisax was an ancient dragon who, long before the events of the game, assumed human form in order to share dragon communion, the practice of consuming dragon hearts to gain their power, with the people of the lands between. She gave up her original form in service of a mission of connection. When you encounter her at the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion in the Shadow Realm, she is a diminished figure, weakened, sleepless in a way that implies something has been wrong for a very long time. The item description that accompanies her spirit Ash says that she assumed this spirit form specifically to offer her service to a new lord. That lord, in the context of the game, is you. Her first summoning provides a full damage negation boost to all nearby allies. She was always a being defined by what she gave. The man who climbed broken. Egon is one of the most beloved characters introduced in Shadow of the Erdtree, and he is not a spirit Ash in the conventional sense. He is an NPC summon called through a furled finger item, rather than through the spirit calling bell. But his presence in the Bale the Dread encounter has defined how players think about spirit assistance in the DLC. Egon was a Drake warrior who lost the use of his legs fighting Bale, one of the most fearsome dragons in the realm's history, whose connection to the origins of Dragon Communion is implied by the questline's context, though never fully stated. Egon dragged himself up the jagged peak on broken legs, driven by a hatred so pure and specific that it functions almost as a spiritual force. When you summon him in Bale's arena, his entrance monologue has become one of the most celebrated pieces of voice acting in the game. Raw, furious, exultant. He has been waiting for this moment longer than you have been alive. The two who were forged in the dark, Jolin and Anna, represent one of Shadow of the Erdtree's most mechanically complex spirit ashes to obtain. Sword Hand of Knight Jolin begins as a solo summon, earned by completing Count Emir's questline and giving her the Iris of Grace. Then, to combine her with Anna, a doll body housing a second Sword Hand of Night, you must find Rabbath's Rise via a secret drop from Shaman Village and interact with Anna's puppet while holding Jolin's ashes. The combined spirit becomes something greater than either alone. Their item description says they were born in a cold, dark jail and raised without light, cultivated to become masters of their blades. But the burden of that training left their hearts frail and pliant. They are the most dangerous kind of warrior, technically perfect, emotionally hollowed. Together, they juggle boss aggro between them, bleed enemies with their attacks, and move with a complementarity that suggests they have been fighting side by side since before they could name what they were doing. The dragon who gave her own lightning. Florisax's specific mechanic as a summon is worth dwelling on. When she appears, she casts a version of Dragon Bolt of Florisax, an incantation that boosts damage negation for herself and all nearby allies, including you. This means that her summoning, even before she makes a single attack, functions as a defensive buff for your entire engagement. She then proceeds to fight with her Draconic Bolt attacks, reducing enemy lightning resistance over time with her strikes. The whole package, defensive entry, sustained lightning damage, progressive debuffing, reflects the character of someone who spent millennia thinking about how to help. Florisax did not become a weapon when she assumed human form. She became a protector. The Spirit Ash is the same thing, translated into Ash and Bell. The Black Knight who found the line. Andreas, first commander of Messmer's Black Knights, serves as a window into the moral complexity of the Shadow Realm's history. His DLC item description tells us he was powerful, loyal, and deeply invested in Messmer's cause, until he discovered the serpentine truth at the core of his lord's nature. Messmer's connection to serpents placed him outside the Golden Order's grace in a way that Andreas, a devout soldier, could not accept. He rebelled. He was imprisoned. There is a quiet grandeur in the fact that the man who discovered the line he would not cross and refused to cross it was punished for his integrity. Buried in a catacomb under the DLC's landscape, waiting for a tarnished to fight through spike trap corridors to earn his spirit. He chose honor over survival. The tomb was his reward. The revered blessing. Shadow of the Erdtree introduced a second upgrade track for Spirit Ashes that applies only within the realm of Shadow. Revered Spirit Ashes are items gathered from the corpses of horn-sent figures, the ancient people who once populated the Shadow Realm, and from ritual objects scattered across the DLC's townships and villages. Consuming them at a site of grace increases the Revered Spirit Ash Blessing, a buff that specifically raises summoned spirits' damage output and damage resistance. This blessing does not transfer back to the base game. When you return to the lands between, your spirits revert to their unblessed state. The blessing belongs to the Shadow Realm, accumulated from the remnants of a people who once lived there. You strengthen your spirits with the energy of the dead who populated the world. Your spirits now help you survive. It is the DLC's version of the Glovewort cycle, the sister who sleeps at the edge of the world. Latenna's quest line ends in the consecrated snowfields, at a ruined church called the Apostate Derelict, where a giant albinoric woman sits slumped against the wall. Philia, towering little sister, enormous in the way of first-generation albinorics, waiting in a quiet torpor at the edge of the world. Latenna addresses her as young yet towering sister, and Latenna's dying words, if she is killed, call out Philia's name. In death, she still reaches for that completion. The purpose Latenna has carried across the entire game is delivering a birthing droplet to Philia, who the lore suggests can use it to create new life for all albinorics. The details of what this accomplishes are never fully explained. This may be the beginning of something larger than the questline shows you. What is clear is that Latenna chose to become Spirit Ash for this. The somber, ancient dragon's smithing stone she leaves you with after the scene is her final gift. To you, in exchange for keeping your word. The story ends not with triumph, but with a small act of care between people who had almost nothing. The Fire Knight and the Frenzied Past. Fire Knight Hilda is a shadow of the Erdtree spirit Ash, connected to Messmer's military forces and their history with fire. The Fire Knights were among the most devoted of Messmer's soldiers, wielders of a specific flame associated with the DLC's fire-aspected enemies. Hilda's ashes carry the mark of that devotion. She fights with fire-aspected techniques and a combat style that speaks to years of dedicated service to a cause she believed was righteous. The DLC layers its historical context through ashes like Hilda's. Soldiers of an army that enacted something terrible under orders they followed without questioning. Hilda as a spirit does not judge. She simply fights. But the fire she carries has a history that the DLC unfolds slowly. And by the time you understand what she was part of, the simplicity of her fighting style becomes something heavier. The Gravebird and the Shadow. The Gravebird Ashes, one of the new summons from Shadow of the Erdtree, conjure one of the enormous avian creatures encountered in the DLC's graveyard-heavy environments. Massive birds that drag souls toward rest, their dark feathers the color of dried blood and old stone. As a spirit ash, the Gravebird is a heavy hitter with wide-sweeping attacks that can hit multiple targets and a flight pattern that keeps it mobile in ways that ground-based spirits cannot match. But its most interesting quality is what it represents in the DLC's world building. The Gravebird is a natural feature of the Shadow Realm's relationship with death, a creature that exists to tend the transition between life and what comes after. Summoning one into combat turns a guide of the dead into a weapon. It does not seem to mind. The Bleed Build's best friend. If you are running a build that maximizes blood loss accumulation through rapid weapon hits, the Spirit Ash that synergizes most effectively with that strategy is not necessarily the most famous one. While the Mimic Tier copies your bleed setup and applies bleed independently, it has a delay before activation and sometimes fumbles its weapon choice in the early moments of a fight. Banished Knight Oleg with dual swords has a faster activation, hits consistently, and, crucially, applies his own bleed build-up independent of yours, meaning two separate bleed meters are filling simultaneously. When your bleed procs, the burst of hemorrhage damage resets the enemy's bleed threshold and starts it filling again. While Oleg is filling his, you reset him alongside your own. The combined pressure of two independent bleed sources on a single target is substantially higher than one. The Holy Damage Trick. Spirit ashes from sacred or Erdtree adjacent traditions deal a portion of holy damage in their attacks. Lutel the Headless, for instance, deals holy damage with her spectral lance throws. This matters because many late-game enemies in the lands between, the Elden beast especially, have significant resistance to physical damage. Holy damage bypasses some of that. Lutel's teleporting behavior keeps her alive in fights where most spirits would be deleted immediately, and her holy lances continue hitting even when the boss has moved across the arena. Running Lutel against the Elden beast, the game's final encounter, leverages both her survival ability and the type advantage her damage carries. Many players switch to Tish for Elden beast, and that is also valid. But Lutel's combination of survivability and relevant damage type makes her the analytical pick. The upgrade priority problem. There are 84 spirit ashes in the combined base game and DLC. Fully upgrading even a fraction of them requires enormous quantities of glove wards, which are finite in any given playthrough without farming. The question of what to upgrade first is a genuine strategic consideration. The consensus answer among experienced players is to commit Ghost Glove Wards, the rarer material for legendary and special ashes, to 2 or 3 specific summons rather than spreading upgrades thin. A fully upgraded Black Knife Tish significantly outperforms a half-upgraded Mimic Tear that is also half-upgraded Lutel. Focus creates power. The alternative is having a dozen serviceable summons rather than 2 exceptional ones. Neither approach is wrong, but the game rewards commitment in a way that mirrors its broader design philosophy. Get very good at a few things rather than acceptable at many. The stance break setup. Certain spirit ashes are exceptional at breaking enemy posture. The stance gauge that, when depleted, allows a critical attack. Stormhawk Dean's poise damage buff increases the stagger potential of your own attacks while Dean is active. Banished. Knight Oleg's dual sword rapid strikes accumulate stance damage quickly. Using both in sequence, Dean's buff alongside Oleg's sustained pressure creates a scenario where an enemy that would resist your individual stance-breaking attacks gets overwhelmed by the combination of your boosted strikes and Oleg's rapid hits. The critical attack that follows deals substantial bonus damage and briefly renders the boss vulnerable. The Dean-Oleg pairing is one of those synergies that no item description announces but becomes obvious once you experience it in a fight. The summon that trades with you. An underappreciated property of split-build strategies involving the Mimic Tear is that the Mimic draws independent status effect build-up from the boss. If you are running a poison or frost build, your hits accumulate build-up towards status effect proc on the boss's meter. Your Mimic's hits add a separate parallel build-up. When either proc lands, the other continues from where it left, without resetting both meters simultaneously. This means a Frost and Mimic strategy can proc Frost faster than solo play, then begin accumulating toward a second Frost proc while you are still landing hits. The double trigger synergy is most pronounced with build-up based statuses because the game tracks each source's accumulation separately, a detail in the damage system that the Mimic Tear uniquely exploits by being an independent source of the same damage type. The talisman that changes everything. The Godskin Swaddling Cloth is a talisman recovered from the Spirit Caller's Cave in the mountaintops of the Giants. It restores a portion of your HP with every series of successive melee strikes. Specifically, about 3% of your maximum health plus a flat 30 points, triggered after a set number of consecutive hits. The number of hits required varies by weapon type. Fast weapons like claws need more connections to trigger it, while slower heavy weapons like colossal swords can proc it in just a few strikes. What makes this relevant to Spirit Ash play is that the healing triggers on your hits regardless of whether the boss is focused on you or your summon. When you are freely attacking a boss that is preoccupied with a spirit like the Great Shield Soldiers or banished Knight Oleg, the Swaddling Cloth turns that combat breathing room into active HP restoration. The talisman functions better the more aggressively you can attack. And aggressive attacking is exactly what a Spirit Ash's distraction enables. It is not an interaction the game explains or signals. You discover it by noticing you are not running out of healing anymore. The jellyfish in the late game. Most players retire the Spirit Jellyfish Ashes, Aurelia, Roderica's gift, by the time they reach the game's middle chapters. Her damage feels modest, her health bar modest, her visual weight low compared to legendary knights and towering golems. But a fully upgraded jellyfish at +10 has a meaningful role in very specific scenarios. She applies poison buildup with her tentacle attacks, and unlike most spirits who fight at melee range, she hovers at distance, making her extremely difficult for most bosses to target and kill while she drips poison into the encounter. Against bosses with poor poison resistance, and several late-game targets have exactly that. The jellyfish at maximum upgrade becomes a sustained pressure source that you summoned with 31 FP, and that will not die or fight. Roderica would be pleased. The ash that benefits from your build. Unlike most Spirit Ashes, which have fixed damage tied to their own upgrade level, the Mimic Tear's damage is partially derived from the weapons and spells it copies from your loadout. This means that at identical upgrade levels, a Mimic Tear used by a player running a fully optimized weapon that scales highly with their build will substantially outperform a Mimic Tear used by a player with an early game weapon on a less coherent build. The Mimic is, in this sense, an amplifier of your choices. A player who has invested deeply into a specific damage type, who has found the right weapons and the right talismans for their approach, gives the Mimic more to work with. The Spirit Ash that looks the same in everyone's inventory is actually radically different from player to player. It reflects you. That is exactly what it was built to do. The spirit that completes the arc, summoning Cleanrot Knight Finlay against Malenia. The boss encountered at the deepest point of Elphael, Brace of the Haligtree, is not required. It is not the optimal choice by most technical measures, but it is one of the most thematically complete acts the game offers. Malenia is the reason Finlay's story exists. The battle at Ionia is the reason Finlay had to carry a sleeping goddess across an impossible distance. And Finlay, when summoned against her, fights the way a Cleanrot Knight fought, with the scythe, with Miquella's Ring of Light, with the controlled ferocity of someone who had devoted everything to this exact demigod. She does not win the fight for you. She is there, at the end of everything, still beside Malenia, still loyal, even as an Ash. There is no mechanic that rewards you for this choice. The reward is knowing you understood what you were doing. The Ash behind invisible flaws. To reach Black Flame Monk Armin's ashes, you need to solve a puzzle that the game gives you zero guidance on. Inside the hidden path to the Haligtree, a secret dungeon reached through a hidden trapdoor under a staircase in the connecting area between Lendel and the mountaintops. There is a series of invisible walkways above a large open chamber. The floor does not exist, or rather, it does exist, but cannot be seen. You step off what looks like nothing and land on something, and then proceed to walk across air until you reach the ladder that descends to the Stray Mimic Tear boss fight. The Stray Mimic Tear, identical to the Mimic Tear boss in Nokron, but slightly renamed, drops Amon's ashes upon defeat. There is no message that tells you the invisible flaws are there. You either know from external research, or you fall until you understand, or you never come back. The ash that requires a trap ride. To reach Andreas, Black Knight Commander, the shadow of the Erdtree spirit Ash, you need to navigate the Fog Rift catacombs in the realm of shadow, and the specific room containing his boss fight is accessible only by riding a spike trap platform upward. The spike traps in Elden Ring's catacombs are typically hazards. They rise and fall and impale you. This room turns one into an elevator. Standing on the platform as it rises lifts you into an otherwise inaccessible section of the dungeon. The natural instinct when encountering a spike trap is to avoid it. Choosing to ride it requires either prior knowledge or a specific mindset of experimentation that the game cultivates without explicitly teaching. Andreas waits above, his rebellion and imprisonment preserved in a space that tests, quietly, whether you are willing to stand on something dangerous to find what it carries, the spirit that watched the start. The Chapel of Anticipation Ash, Stormhogdene, is unusual not just for its location, but for the emotional register of returning there. The Chapel of Anticipation is where your character began. You woke up on a boat, stumbled into that chapel, died to the grafted scion, fell into the tutorial, and started your journey. Every player has a version of that beginning. Returning later, after dozens of hours of the lands between, using one of 3 rare imbued sword keys on a portal that takes you back to where everything started. It is a specific kind of pilgrimage. The chapel looks the same. The grafted scion is still there and is dramatically easier now than it was. And in a locked room you could not access before, in a chest above the main hall, a hawk waits. It was always there. It served the old king here, in this building, before the game existed for you. You just had to know to come back. The ash that ends a quest line, ancient dragon Florisax, can only be obtained by making a specific choice in the Dragon Priestess questline, near the end of Shadow of the Erdtree. After defeating Baal the Dread, you return to the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion where Florisax rests. Confessing to having put her to sleep and agreeing to become her lord yields the spirit ash. Choosing differently, refusing, or taking the priestess heart instead, locks you out of her ashes in that playthrough. The door between the two outcomes is a dialogue choice made after one of the DLC's climactic boss fights, when you are still processing what you just experienced. Florisax's ash is reward for a specific kind of honesty in that conversation. Admitting what you did, accepting what that means, and choosing service over acquisition. The warrior in the lava mountain, depraved perfumer Karman, sits at the end of one of the game's less visited discovery paths. Volcano Manor is a location many players find through Ria's questline or through the Altus Plateau approach, and the manor itself involves a murder quest mechanic that takes you to various locations across the map. But inside the manor itself, across from a locked room in a corridor past the drawing room, there is an illusory wall that the game does not mark, does not hint at, and does not reward you for noticing except by being there. Through that wall is a passage. At the end is the locked room's other entrance, and inside that room on a corpse are Carmen's ashes. He was searching for a way to bring back the dead. He died inside a volcano stronghold, behind a hidden door, inside a room that most players never enter. The physic of revivification never arrived. The ash locked, behind a questline, within a questline. The Night Maiden and Swordstress puppets are found in Nokron, Eternal City. Accessible only after defeating Starscourge Radon, descending through the crater in Limgrave, reaching the underground city, and proceeding to a specific location within it. the ashes themselves are categorized as puppets, requiring ghost gloveworts for upgrade, and are found near a body in the city. The fact that they are labeled puppets, despite having no connection to Seluvis or his craft, is a lore note. The word puppet in Elden Ring carries multiple meanings. These two were constructed or bound servants of the Nox people's underground civilization, more akin to marionettes of spirit than to the willfully overwritten people Seluvis collected. They are puppet in the older sense, not controlled but constructed. The distinction matters in a world where the difference between servitude and slavery is often only a question of who did the binding. The 3 bells in the spirit. To obtain the Sword Hand of Night. Jolan Ash as a standalone summon. You must complete Count Ymir's questline. Ring 3 bells in 3 separate finger ruins spread across the Shadow Realm. Then return to the Cathedral of Manos Mater and exhaust the quest conclusion. The 3 bells are each in remote, difficult to find ruins, and the questline does not mark them on your map. You find the bells through exploration or through community knowledge. Each ring produces a response in the world, a progression that culminates in Jolan's transformation from an NPC who helps you to a spirit ash you carry. Her description says that the Iris of Grace gave her a light that was at times blinding, threatening to expunge her night entirely. What she was, a creature of shadow trained without kindness, was threatened by what she found. The ash contains both versions of her. The quest line. No one finished in one. Try. The Latenna quest line is the most interconnected spirit ash journey in the base game. It requires finding a hidden man disguised as a pot in a poison swamp village, delivering a half medallion to a woman sitting beside a dead wolf at the end of a cave dungeon, carrying that woman's voluntary ash form across the entire map to retrieve the other half of the medallion from a castle in the snow, then bringing her to a ruin at the edge of the consecrated snowfields to find a giant sleeping woman and place a small offering in her hand. At any point in that chain, a misstep, picking up the second medallion half before speaking to Latenna, reaching the snowfields before triggering her dialogue update, can permanently break the quest line, locking you out of the reward. More players accidentally soft lock it than complete it on their first attempt. The somber ancient dragon smithing stone at the end is one of the rarest upgrade materials in the game. The ash that watches everything end. The regal ancestor spirit is a second, stronger version of the ancestor spirit ash, found not in Siofra River, but in Nokron, Eternal City, requiring the same ritual of lighting flame pillars, this time within the underground city, accessible only after Radan's defeat. It fights with larger sweeping antler strikes, greater health, and a slightly more frenzied presence than its counterpart below. But the detail that lingers is the geography. Nokron was the city banished underground by the Greater Will for pursuing unauthorized power. It still contains a regal ancestor spirit. The old natural forces, the pre-Erdtree stag powers, survived the exile of the people who worshipped them. When the Nox were cast down and sealed beneath the earth, the ancestor spirit came with them, or was already there, has always been there, older than whatever the Greater Will built above. Lighting the flames in a buried city to summon something that preceded the whole argument is the kind of detail Elden Ring leaves without comment. The final bell. There are 84 spirit ashes in Elden Ring between the base game and Shadow of the Erdtree, and each one is a person, a creature, a moment, or a mistake preserved in ash. Some of them are legendary knights whose names the game illuminates in glowing text, Some of them are rats. Some of them are ancient dragons who gave up their original forms to share power with the people they cared about. Some of them are a small hawk that served an old king in a building you visited on your first day and never returned to until everything had already changed. What they share is that something remained, some residue of who they were or what they did, strong enough to be carried, strong enough to answer when a bell rings. The lands between is full of things that should have ended and did not. That is perhaps the gentlest version of what the whole game is about. The dead do not always leave. Sometimes they stay at the edge of the fire, waiting to be asked,